So I've worked with some, I guess you could call them relatively big name gurus, some people that you see right here, including Eli Wilde, who is Tony Robbins' #1 salesperson ever, sold over $100 million worth of coaching and services for Tony Robbins. We got Dan Henry, who he's made over, I guess he keeps saying 30 million, but it's got to be more than that by this point online. He's spoken at FHL. He's done a bunch of stuff with Russell Brunson. Anyway, Dan Henry, Max was just is a friend. He's not a client. But let's see who else we got. Clark Kegley is a client. I think there's a better picture of Clark and I. But Clark you've probably been served some of his stuff on either YouTube or TikTok. He has 1.5 million some odd followers. We got Brian Moncada, who's also a client. He runs all of the YouTube ads for a lot of big name guys. Tai Lopez, like John Assaraf, like Jordan Belfort, Brandon Carter, who's also a client. We got Elliott Hulse, who basically invented online fitness coaching. He's got millions of followers. He's on every motivational video that exists on the internet. Elliott's a client. Brandon Carter's a client. He's got a few million followers. He kind of took the Elliott Hulse torch and kept running with it. Made millions of dollars online. There's Brian again. Ravi Abuvala, CEO of Scaling with Systems. If you've not heard of Ravi, made, I think at this point he keeps saying 25 million, but it's over 25 million, I would imagine. And there's Eli. Brandon again. Who else we got? Rohan's not a client, but who else? Anyway, Benny Fowler, client. He won Super Bowl with Peyton Manning. He caught Peyton Manning's last professional pass of his career, or in a 2-point conversion in that Super Bowl with the Broncos. And so he's a speaker and a consultant now, also a client. So I say that not to flex, but I've worked with some relatively big name people, and I've learned some stuff that I figured might be worth sharing with you guys. So without further ado, let's go into it. I have separated this out into 2 separate categories. One is things that I've learned that are commonalities and traits that they all have that hopefully you can apply in your own life. And I've got a few of the things that I've learned, I'll say, behind the scenes that wouldn't necessarily be learned by anyone other than someone who had incredible amounts of transparency into the lives and businesses and statuses and situations of all of these people. Let's go into the 5 commonalities of things that they have in common. Here we go. All right. So I would say the #1 commonality that they all have is that they invest heavily in themselves. I have not met a single person who has accomplished anything that is anywhere near noteworthy that doesn't prioritize investing in themselves. It seems to be a sticking point for a lot of people, in especially the way that courses and programs and masterminds and stuff are sold, and they're sold in such a way like this is the only thing you'll ever need ever again. And we're going to touch on a little bit, I think, in the behind the scenes part. But the way that these things are sold make you think that you don't have to invest ever again in anything else, and that's just simply not true. As part of the game, just realize that's the deal. I don't know, I've invested over $500,000 in myself and in I'll just say my education, in just courses, masterminds, coaches, you name it. Dan Henry does a thing where he's asking people, he goes around the room in this mastermind. I was in one of the times that he did this, and he's like, how much have you spent on courses, coaches, consulting, masterminds, all that stuff? And he goes around the room and everybody says their dollar amount. And then he goes, how much have you made online? And he goes around the room and asks the same people. And there's a direct correlation with the amount of money that one invests in themselves and the amount of money that they make. There's a direct correlation. There's not a single person that I know that was just like, yep, I just bought that one course and that solved it all. Something to consider. And to be clear, you'd be like, oh, they're big names. It's easy to invest when you have those types of resources. I agree. However, for example, I think this was in 2021, I paid Dan Henry $100,000 in full to work with him one-on-one for a year. To be clear, I took out a loan to do that because he didn't accept any sort of a payment plan. And that was an enormous stretch for me. Just to let you know, I make sacrifices too, to invest in myself, knowing that, all right, if I just throw myself all into this, I know it would be hilariously unreasonable if I was attached to a guy who's made $30 million online for a year and didn't make at least $100,000 additional money. It would be wildly unreasonable. I would just have to give up and not do anything. And so that was my logic, but it was a big stretch for myself. When I worked with my little secret Yoda guy in 2015, 16, 17, I had no income. I was doing landscaping fucking services for the guy because I barely had the cash to pay him. And so we worked out a number of weird ass deals to make it work. So that's number one. They invest heavily in themselves. Number two, clarity. They actively get very clear on their desired outcomes. I can tell you everybody on this list, or at least right here that I've worked with, they all have some form of written, documented outline of what they're trying to accomplish. They're very specific on everything that they're trying to do, whether it's they do a product launch, they want to be very clear on how many enrollments they're going to get. If they, are trying to, like Ravi very specifically, I know he has what I think he calls his life manifesto. I have something similar where it's basically you sit down and you write out what is your ideal situation, your ideal life. So they're all very hyper clear on where they're going and why they're going there. There's not a single accident of anybody that I've ever met that is very successful that they're not very hyper deliberate and clear about designing as if they were like the video game designer. They're very hyper clear on what they're trying to accomplish. And so what I would recommend for you guys is go through our purpose and vision stuff. Get very clear on why you're doing what you're doing and where you want to go and link them together. You're going to rewire. That whole thing is designed to rewire your pathway, your neural pathways, so that your vision, your goals, and your reason why is all linked together, right? So right now, if you're not doing the things that, for example, maybe you should be doing, it's because they're linked with something that goes against a value that you have or a vision that you have. So you have a vision or a value that's a higher priority, for example, than growing your business. And so you need to relink them and rewire them in order to basically get yourself to do the activities that are required. And so these guys are all very clear on their values, where they're going, and they're linked in such a way, whether they did it deliberately or not, it doesn't really matter. Some people, I'm not one of these guys, but some people, it's really easy for them to do it. I wasn't, which is why I developed all the tools that we have is for myself that I still use every day to this day so that I can be hyper clear on where I'm going. And it's impossible to create what you want to create without being hyper clear on it. And all these guys, hyper clear. Number 3, principles. They all have, most are written down. They have a clear set of guiding principles that they adhere to. They have a set of decision-making principles that they adhere to. They have things that they reference. If this happens in my life, that means I'm going to do that as a result. And just like Ray Dalio wrote a book called Principles, those are his principles. Number 1 hedge fund in the entire world, a multi-billionaire, book called Principles. He wrote it because those are the principles that he refers back to. And so all of these guys here, they have some form of that for themselves. They have some form of written, documented principles that they refer back to when things get challenging, when things go really well. They all have very clear principles. And to be clear, that doesn't mean that they're the right principles for everyone, which is why I always say what works for you. Document what works for you and then keep doing that. Because inevitably things are going to get fucky at some point in your life. And so you need something, in my opinion, I don't know how people do it without it, something to refer back to that's, oh yeah, here's what I needed to remind myself of. So when you do that, life is a lot, at least less prone to be chaotic because you're creating organization. And as a side note, as you might have heard me say, money loves organization. And so if you're not organized with your finances, if you're not organized with just basic shit, like money will go away from you, okay? If you're not organized with your principles, if you don't have an actual, like, here's my philosophy on life, here's my philosophy on business, here's what I'm, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. If you don't have that, you're leaving it up to hopes and wishes and guesses. And I made a post earlier today about trusting your gut. The richest people that I know and have studied, I've studied a lot of them, all of them basically say the same thing. And that is, if you're going to be successful, and you're thinking that you're going to rely on your gut, it's like the equivalent of, imagine, I use this a lot, this analogy a lot. You're a brand new, you want to be a pilot. You go to flight instruction school. You go up for your first flight and you hear a loud thud. Your gut is going to tell you shit's fucked. When reality is you look over to the instructor and you're fine. It was a landing gear. So by relying on your gut, especially in situations where you have not accomplished the result that you're trying to accomplish, that is a very risky place to be coming from, relying on your gut. So a lot of people are like, oh, trust my gut. Yes, in situations that you are familiar with, in environments that you have experience in. But if you have no experience in scaling to 7 figures, trusting your gut is designed to keep you safe inside of your existing bubble. And so if you're trusting your gut, you're going to take actions that keep you where you are. And so I'm not saying don't trust your gut. I'm just saying it would be silly for the new flight instruction student to trust his gut and take an action based on something in his first flight. That would be stupid, right? And so what we need are principles to make decisions, and we need others that have been to where we're trying to go. We need to borrow their principles, try them out, keep the ones that work for us, document them, and throw out the ones that don't work for us. There's a lot of things that I've been through that I've rejected because they simply don't work for me. However, there's sets of principles that do work for me, that I do have documented in some way, shape, or form, that I do refer back to, and a lot of them I've shared with you guys. They all have a clear set of principles as to how they make decisions, why they make decisions, if this, then that, so that they can take their emotions out of their decision-making process. All right, next, influence and communication. All of these guys have a very high understanding of the fundamentals of influence and communication. So I've recommended books like 2 books by Robert Cialdini, which are Influence and Persuasion. Those kind of handle the influence side, that and just basic sales and understanding of human operation. But those are very good. Everything that we have that outlines the people matrix, right? It's literally how to spot and identify everyone at every level on the emotional scale and how to influence them up or how to influence them down, and what to do, how to spot them, how to choose people to hire, how to choose people for your intimate relationships, how to choose friends. Whether these guys at this level have all gone through formal training or they just innately, some people just natural at it. Again, I was certainly not a natural, which is why I developed all these frameworks and stuff. But everything, for example, inside of, if you just go in circle and search for people matrix, everything inside of that was a framework that I borrowed, reconfigured, and recommunicated so that I could understand it. And that's what I refer back to and use when I am choosing people. And we have communication masterclasses where we're talking about the fundamentals of communication. So I was a guy who was terrible at it. Like my growing up, like my family wasn't the greatest communicating family in the world. I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that shit was fucked. I went off to basically study it, and I had to create fundamental principles and frameworks for myself to refer back to, of which that I've learned from somebody else. Like I didn't make any of this up, but I've repackaged it in a way that I could actually understand it. That's all. But there are fundamentals of influence and communication that all of these guys have, because you can be the clearest in the world on where you're going, but if you can't communicate it and you can't influence anybody else to get on board with it, it's useless. And if you don't have any principles, if you do get somebody on board, if you don't have any principles as to how you as an organization or you as even as a person make decisions, and you can't communicate that to somebody else on your team, they can get antsy. They can get frustrated. They can get upset. And so all of this is very key. For example, Kayla knows how, for the most part, I make decisions. And if I'm going in a direction that I know she hasn't experienced, like in her life or with me, I will let her know, here's how I'm thinking about this. Here's the fundamental principles. And I'll do my best to communicate it to where she goes, okay, I got it. I've duplicated your communication. I understand. We're on the same page. And so all these guys, they do that very well. Everybody who's stuck is basically violating all of these in some degree. And without further ado, let's move on to number 5, speed. All these guys move fast and they do high volume. Most people are just slow. I don't know how else to say it. Most people are just slow, and mainly that's because of fear, which is why, again, we have the fear tool, we have the doubt tool, we got the resentment tool. Any reason that you're not moving at the speed that you would like has nothing to do with your ability to move at that speed. It has everything to do with the blocks that are keeping you from actually taking those actions. And so your perceptions that are causing you to do or not do the things right now in your business or in your life, those are the things that need to be cleared. And so a lot of these guys, they either naturally have those fears or doubts or inhibitions. I was not one of them, to be clear. I've worked with the guy for 2.5 years, for fuck's sake, 4 days a week, 6 hours a day to take an inventory and clear all my shit. And that's why we have that whole bulletproof mind system. I wasn't one of those. So if you're not one of those and you're not doing something to clear that shit regularly, and then you're not taking that and getting into fast action, it won't matter what you do. You're pretty much fucked. And these guys, for any number of reasons, they're fast. Either they just heard I should be fast and they just decided to speed up with no inhibitions, or they came to me and they were like, yo, I want to go faster. And I got these things that are distracting my attention, right? And a lot of times, especially the higher levels you go up, it doesn't really have anything to do with the actual business itself. A lot of times when I help a client grow a business, the first thing that I'm looking at is what's going on with you personally, individually, right? And so I believe there's some masterclass and framework that we have on this that's basically there's these levels of existence, right? There's these levels of influence. The first level is just you, right? There's the second level, which is your intimate relationship. Who are you directly connected to? Third level, groups that you're connected to, families, companies, right? Fourth level, humanity. And just for the sake of this example, we're just going to go out to these 4. So if you're having a tough time on your third level here, if you're having a tough time, you got a block here, it's a lot of times it's caused by level 2 or level 1. Just let's think about it. If you're not personally feeling great that day, that would be a level 1. How could you possibly show up very well in your relationship? You can't. So therefore you feel guilty. Then how could you possibly show up well in your company when you're feeling like shit about yourself in some way, or you feel as though something's going on? Whatever it is, if you're not feeling awesome, it's going to affect your relationship. It's going to affect your company, right? Now, sometimes you can brute force fight your way through it, but that's where you get burnout and exhaustion, right? So what you got to do, at least that I've found, is you have to get rid of the blocks at levels 1 and level 2. Level 1, yourself. Level 2, your immediate intimate relationship. And by the way, even if you don't have one, that can be a thing that maybe you feel bad for not having one. Therefore, you'll overcompensate by saying, I'm just going to go be mega successful. And now you're going to be mega successful for the reasons of getting money, for example, to attract the right person. But now you're going to attract that person because of success, and that's going to cause a relationship issue, because now you're going to get basically the proverbial gold digger who doesn't want to be with you for you. They want to be with you for other reasons, and that's going to be unfulfilling, and that's going to cause new issues on that second level, which is going to cause new issues on that first level. And I'm not saying you can't be successful, right, financially without handling your own shit. There's plenty of billionaires who hate themselves. In fact, there was a story that I've used in the past. I think his name was Adolf Merkel. You can Google it. Story of a guy, I think his name was Adolf Merkel. German billionaire, multi-billionaire. He did some business deal where he lost $300 million and still had $600 million left. Something like that. That $300 million loss hit him so hard that he decided that he was going to get up in the middle of the night one day, walk across town to a train station and step in front of a moving train and leave behind 3 kids and a wife, and killed himself. And he had $600 million left. So, he had a company that affected humanity on a large scale. You can't be a billionaire unless you have that. But he didn't handle the most important thing, and that was himself. And so I say this to say you'll go faster in your third level here of companies, of family, of groups that you're a part of, and you'll be able to influence humanity here at the fourth level, which everybody here wants to have an impact on humanity. You got to get levels 1 and 2 handled first. I won't name names, but and this has happened numerous times, where especially working with guys that are 25 to 45 years old, if they're not married, a lot of them have multiple relationships going on at once. Not only is that time consuming, but it's also not, I'll just say, it's not very conducive to a solid moral and ethical basis to feel really great about yourself. And again, we do better when we feel better about ourselves. And not to say that it's not fun. Fuck, I used to be that guy. Okay. I'm not I'm not saying go do it. I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying it's really tough to feel your best about yourself when you're doing things that deep down you know you shouldn't do. And what we did was we eliminated and consolidated these relationships down into one. Instantly, the business started doing better, mainly because the attention units that were being used to distract these guys were no longer out there on the opposite sex. And so growing a business doesn't always mean that we're getting into the weeds of the business, because at the end of the day, getting to 7 or even 8 figures, like, we all know how to do it. If you've already closed even a few clients, 5, 10, 15, 20 clients, and you got leads and you closed them, like, you just repeat that process and you standardize it, and then you do the math on it, and there's no reason you can't do that exact same thing again and again and again. We all know that innately, but the reason that we don't all execute on that, one of the biggest main things is where our own attention units are, which prevent us from executing on what I just said with a level of speed that actually gets it done. And then we distract ourselves because we don't have any principles and we're not clear on where we're going. And you could say that's like the cause of the shiny object syndrome. Kind of digressing just a little bit here, but at the end of the day, we got to have speed of implementation and high volume. There's clients that I've worked with that never did paid advertising before, for example, yet very successful. And a lot of it was through like JVs and referrals. And I'm just like, that's fine. But there was no predictable client acquisition system. And so I'm like, all right, we got to start. Let's build a funnel. So we built a funnel, and guys worth millions of dollars hesitant to spend on ads. I'm like, let's just do the math on this. He had a $4,600 LTV, lifetime value. And so I'm like, cool, we got to be willing to spend up to 20% in an online business model. We should be willing, if we're going to do paid advertising, we got to be willing to spend up to 20% of the actual contract value to acquire that client. And so it's basically $1,000. We got to be willing to spend up to $1,000 to acquire a $4,600 client. And so in his world, when we're hesitant and trusting his gut, why don't we just start off like he had done the basic like entry level Facebook ads, whatever shit on YouTube probably, or like when these ad gurus sell courses, because they're trying to sell them to as many people as possible, they're like, here's how to start ads and be profitable with only $5 a day. That's bullshit. It's bullshit because you couldn't possibly spend enough at that spend level. You couldn't gather enough data to even have any clue. And at that point, you'd have to be 200 days in a row of spending $5 a day before you could even be coming close to expecting to close your first deal for a $4,600 lifetime value product. And so he was all hesitant to spend on ads. And I'm just like, that's cool. $5-10 a day. It's just, yeah, it's like opening your eyes. Like, nobody here should have a product that sells for less than $5,000. That means that if you're even considering paid advertising and you want to close one client a week from paid advertising and you're not spending $1,000 a week on ads, you're kidding yourself. And when you start out, and I told him this, I'm like, when you start out, it's going to be terrible. So like, I'm saying 20% I'm saying the $1,000 customer acquisition cost is like optimal, like when you're good. Starting out, you're going to be like at least twice as bad. So expectation setting. Anyway, I'm like, the speed at which you're moving, like you got to be willing to invest. Otherwise, there's only 2 options for client acquisition. It's paid or organic. Your organic right now isn't scalable the way that you've done it currently, and you're afraid to do paid. We're at an impasse here. And long story short, I was able to convince him we got to spend $400 or $500 a day to test, bro. Like, how fucking long do you want this to take? He cleared a fear charge on it. He's all right, let's fucking go. And so now, anyway, I think he told me the other day, this is one of my private clients. He told me the other day, I don't know what his deal size is average, $4,600. The largest client he's got was like a $150,000 LTV. He's got one on the hook could be potentially $1 million LTV deal from ads. So I'm like, we got to spend, dude. But that alone, let's just say that deal closes. fear of taking action and having speed and knowing the math and the numbers and being clear on exactly what we're trying to accomplish, none of that would have happened. Anyway, we got to go fast, like Ricky Bobby, but we got to do it wisely. All right. So behind the scenes of a couple things that I've learned, here's a controversial one. So one of the things that we do that I'm not like super overtly like broadcasting because it can paint the wrong picture. You guys might have heard me say the only difference between a really good con man and a really good entrepreneur is a good back end product. Everything else, marketing and sales wise, leading up to the actual transaction is the exact same. And so if you study, like we watch a lot of like Netflix documentaries on con men, and there's one on even, I think it's the next Netflix one where it's like how to become a cult leader or how to build a cult or something like that. All they're doing is basically like it's sales. It just so happens that their product is like fucked up. If you look at what a cult leader does, and then you look at what Disney or Apple does, or any of the guys here on this list, they all do the same shit. They all do the same shit, okay? It's just what's a good back-end product. So we watch a lot of that type of stuff. And I will say too, maybe this is a good bonus sixth one here, and that is identity. My client, Clark Kegley, the guy with the couple million YouTube subs, he has a program called Metamorphic. I don't know if he still runs it this way or not, but his whole thing is basically his story is he started out as mom's basement. He was a drummer. He really wanted to be a drummer, like a famous Travis Barker type of a drummer, and he's really fucking good. And so I forget exactly what he went through. You can go to his YouTube channel, check him out. Love the guy. He's one of the best guys I know. I need to create what is the identity that I'm going to be stepping into. There's another friend of mine, Quasi Joe here. He does much the same. His thing is called Reality Creator. The long and the short is, it's like I said earlier, you get very clear on exactly who I'm going to be. Like you just invent yourself. I have invented myself here. What I look like, how I show up, like all of this is very deliberate. So that's who I want to be. Or at least that was like, this is my current iteration of who I want to be, right? And so if I'm clear on that, then I can just step into, it's almost like a character, right? It's almost like you get to invent your own character. So all of these guys have invented their own character in some way. Some are a bit more outrageous or outspoken or reserved than others. It doesn't really matter. The point is they're all very deliberate on who they are, who they want to be. And underneath all of that is clarity on who that needs to be, the principles that person needs to live by, how does that person influence and communicate. So they're all very deliberate about the identity. And so for you guys, what I would recommend is, I don't necessarily have a process for this, could create one, but it's basically, here's the process. Write out what you want your identity to be. I want to do this, I want to look like that. And just the clearer that you are on that end result, the more you can begin to step more and more into it. And that will come from things like inside of the vision and purpose process, right? We ask questions like, who do you most admire? What are the movies and songs that give you inspiration? What makes you feel like, yeah, that's fucking it? So for me, we got Neo from The Matrix, right? I like that. Specifically, Christian Bale as Batman in The Dark Knight. I'm like, that dude's fucking badass. And so it's those types of things. The guy in the movie Pulp Fiction, the Wolf, that's actually who my son is named after. His middle name is Wolf. I wanted it to be his first name, but we compromised. He's named after the wolf. Comes in and fucking fixes problems. And so I like certain aspects of it, and so I've basically deliberately designed an identity that ever more adheres to like little bits and pieces of these different identities that I admire. And so all of these guys basically do their own version of that. All right. A few things of what I've learned, I'll just say behind the scenes. Number one is they all have emotional shit. And what we see on the outside, and myself included, to be clear, nobody's life is perfect. Not a single one. Mine, none of these people that I've listed in this video here, nobody's perfect. Everybody's got shit. That I do know for sure. And I made a post the other day about specifically feeling like others have more than us. Others have more than we do. You can go and read it, but basically the gist is because of the law of conservation of energy, that means that energy is neither created nor destroyed. It only is transformed or transferred from one form to another. That must mean that if I'm comparing myself against a guy like Elon Musk, who's worth 350 some odd billion dollars. I could be like, I don't have Elon's type of wealth. The truth is that is incorrect, because energy is not created nor destroyed. I just have that wealth in a different form. And so I have youth that Elon does not, that he could not pay enough money to get, right? Would I give up my wife, my family, my dog, my son, my everything that I know and have been through, and my memories and my experiences to trade places with Elon? I would not. Would I give up my physical body? If you're going to adhere to somebody else's life that you think that theirs is better than yours, you have to take the whole package. You can't take just a little bit of it. That's not how, if it did work, that's not how it would work. So I would have to take Elon's physical body. I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of Elon Musk like on his yacht with no shirt on. I'm all set. I don't want that. So the point is, we're just rich in different ways. And one of those things is, first of all, just understanding that they have shit too. It's just in a different form. So everything that you're feeling fucked up about, they're not feeling fucked up about the same stuff. They're feeling equally as fucked up, though, about different stuff. That's all that's happening. That's why you can make all the money in the world, but if you're going to bring you wherever you go. And if you're not handling you, if we're not taking care of this in the middle here, you're going to bring that with you, and it's going to suck. You're going to hit your goals and you're going to feel like shit, and you wonder why. There's been goals that I've hit that I thought I wanted to hit that I was very let down by. The good news is we have grief and loss tool, which is a hell of a fucking tool. Guilt tool, infatuation tools. Gotta use them, okay? And that's why these guys came to me, is because a lot of them, not all of them, this isn't singling anybody out or making a blanket statement. However, I will say all of them had emotional shit they needed to work through, as we all do. Number one, right? So everybody's got it. Just to let you know, just because they look happy on Instagram doesn't mean they are. Just because it looks like they got it all figured out doesn't mean they do, okay? Just letting you know, and that's okay. I don't have it all figured out, to be clear. Nobody has it all figured out, and that's part of the fun of this physical universe, is figuring it out. Number two, we'll just say financial IQ. That is a G, that is not a Q. Is hit or miss. Part of financial IQ is making money. But as we've learned from watching Mike Tyson, he now has to fight 25-year-olds to make enough money to continue to cover his losses that he's accumulated over his life. He went bankrupt after making over $300 million in his actual boxing career. He's not the only story of this. It's not about how much you make, it's about what you do with what you make. There's the famous story of the UPS driver, I think his name, it escapes me, Richard something or other, Richard Johnson, I want to say. Never made more than $14,000 in a year as a UPS driver, and all he did was take his bonuses in UPS stock. He retired with a net worth of $76 million. He's richer than, if he's alive, richer than Mike Tyson. So it's not about how much. I cannot stress this enough. I know plenty of people who are doing $500K, $700K, $1 million a month with a team of 46 people. And from the outside looking in, you'd be like, they're crushing it. Few of them like it. I'll just say that. I'm going to say all of them, but few of them actually are like, this is exactly, I love it. Like, this is just letting you know, okay? So I can just say it's not across the board, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. I just know that I'm verifiably richer than people that I thought were like really ballin'. It's not, just take everything from the outside looking in with an incredible grain of salt, and you'll learn that part of the influence stuff is managing people's perception of you, which is important. We can't avoid it. To some degree, we have to manage what people think about us if we're going to sell stuff. Like, if we're going to influence people to do what we want them to do, buy our stuff and make money, I have to manage your perception in some type of way. If I showed up, like, I could say this exact same shit with a torn, dirty wife beater on and I haven't showered in a week and just whatever in a closet or whatever, it would be received different. So anyway, but the financial IQ part, dude, I can't stress it enough. And as part of the financial IQ part is obviously you need to track your shit. Like, you can't have a financial IQ and not know your numbers, like, really. And I will say there's been a lot of people that on the outside preach knowing numbers, and when I get in there, they find out real quick that they fucking don't. But that's why I exist. That's one of the reasons why people come to me, is because in order to change reality, we got to look at reality. And if we think reality is one thing and we're doing a thing that theoretically should change that reality, yet it's not changing, that means that most likely the reality that we're looking at is not real. So if somebody tells me that they're making $100,000 a month profit and I say, cool, what's your overhead? They say $20,000 and they're taking home $80,000, and they say, this is just a simple example, how much should I set aside? And I go, everything on top of your living expenses should go into some investment where your money's working for you, is a blanket statement. So let's just say, I'll just say I would look at, I never give financial advice because I'm not a financial advisor, but I will give fundamental principles and suggestions of what to consider based on what I've learned that has worked for me. And I might say, here's a percentage that I would consider one that makes sense. So let's just say, based on what they told me verbally, I'll say like, all right, cool, set aside $45,000 and have it on an auto investment. If I find out later that not only did they not do that, but the $100,000 in profit that they were saying they made, once I actually get my hands on the actual like business financials and I see that it's $34,000 a month in actual profit, and then I get to hear their stories as to why and the explanations, and what happened was, now of course no wonder they never set up the auto transfer that I told them to set up, is because they didn't have the money that they were telling me that they had. And so you can't change reality unless you're actually looking at reality, which is why you need to actually track and be honest with your tracking. And in order to do that, you probably, if you're resistant to that, need to clear a fear charge about it or some other associated charge. Otherwise, you'll never get honest. You'll never look at reality, and everything that you do to try to distract yourself from facing reality, like buying more tactics and strategies, or trying to convince yourself that you need to totally reinvent your offer or something that makes you feel busy but doesn't actually move the needle. You just have to know that you can't complain about the result after that, because you just have to know if you're not feeling good about your existing situation, so much so that you're afraid to look at it and you're afraid to track it accurately, you're going to make only decisions that you're either going to hope, wish, and guess, and maybe there's a very small percentage chance you'll get it right. But more likely, what is more likely to happen is you're going to go and make a lot of incorrect decisions that basically leave you convincing yourself that you're actually making progress when you're not, because you're not tracking, therefore you can't know. Or they're going to just waste a whole bunch of time, waste a whole bunch of energy, waste a whole bunch of money. So anyway, this is the importance of that. And so that's a large reason why people come to me, is because we face reality, and if we can't, then we clear the fucking fears that we're afraid of facing reality, then we dive into the fucking reality and fix it. And when we do that, we actually fix reality, now reality actually starts to change. It's like the number one epiphany that all of my clients have. And it's the number one thing they need somebody with, as Elliott Hulse, for example, he's like the alpha male of alpha males that started the alpha male thing on YouTube ever. He's one of the pummel you into submission guys. And if you've seen like his video review or one of our interviews together, he's just, nobody ever calls me on my shit. They're just afraid to. He's like, you fucking, it took me by surprise. You called me on my shit. Nobody calls me on my shit. I'm just like, it's what you fucking paid me to do, bro. Like, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't help you illuminate the things that were holding you back. And a lot of charisma and followers can only get you so far, but without a good financial IQ, you'll only have followers and charisma. So with way less followers, like I don't have my audience is not large, but the people that are in it are relatively, I'll just say, high level for I don't want to say even the majority of it, but there's a reason why I'm able to make the same amount of money as somebody with 3-4 million followers with an effective audience of, I use my active engaged email list plus my Instagram engagement to tell me like what's my engaged follower count. Really, the last 270-day openers of my email list is like 15,000 people. And that's about what my engaged audience is like across combined social platforms. And I'm just saying, it's not about how much, it's about what you do with what you've got. I guess next, we got two more. Basics. And I basically just touched on all of this, but when things go awry, it's usually because basics have been forgotten. Even with the biggest names, we forgot, fundamentals of communication. That's right. I got to make sure my team duplicated what I was saying to them, meaning they understood it, and I made sure they understood it before I just left. Just basic stuff. And that all goes back to basic stuff. We got to handle ourselves before we can bring the best version of us to our relationship, before we can bring the best version of us to our business, before we can bring the best version of us to the rest of humanity. That's a basic. Everybody knows that, right? But my job is usually to get clear on reality and then remind people of shit that they already know, that because of all of this accumulation of experiences, because remember, you, the real you, is this energy that is everything. I'm not going to reteach this whole thing, but this is the real you. And so what happens is we have all of these experiences. So here's an experience that happened that was bad, right? We'll just say bad experience, right? And so what happens is those accumulate, and they basically accumulate, and they start to cover our ability to see out clearly into the world. Without these red, terrible experiences, we're able to see relatively clearly, and therefore we make pretty decent decisions. But every time team lets you down, this gets shut down, this bullshit happened, platform changed, now all of a sudden you start to accumulate all of these past experiences that you think you got it together, but whether you know it or not, now you're looking at the world through a much different lens. And I've used the analogy of it's like putting on drunk goggles. And so it's tough to remember the basics. It's tough when you have this emotional shit right here that basically prevents us from doing the basics. And so it's relatively simple. And that's how we're able to grow businesses, just by changing how people think, is by eliminating the things that are causing them to think in a so-called drunken manner. But we got to do it systematically. It's not just knowing this intellectually is 1% of it. Like, congratulations, you got to 1% of it. But that's like knowing intellectually that you need to stop, eating donuts and work out. But you just have a few more, I took 10 steps today. That's better than 0 steps yesterday, when the reality is, in order to hit your goals that you probably not clarified, you need to take 10,000 steps a day, but you're not tracking that. So you just convince yourself that somehow 5 steps a day and 3 less donuts a day is progress. It's just not. And this is a repeat, but few people are willing to tell the all-knowing big guru guys the truth. Mainly also because they don't know how to identify the truth themselves. And so what I've found is the truth is in numbers and metrics. That's why the entire physical universe is put together it's basically math. The entire physical universe, there's sacred geometry, there's sacred math. The entire universe is a math equation. It's what makes up what some call the matrix. It's just numbers. It's math, it's equations. That's what it is. And so in order to navigate this place, we need to be able to know what are our true numbers, where's our actual coordinates, and where are we actually trying to go. And so that's why we got to get clear on where we're going, get clear on where we are, and clear the things that are causing us to, if this is the grid, we think that we're here, but the reality is that we're here and we're trying to go here. These require 2 entirely different routes. And there's just so many people that are out there right now thinking that they're here when they're actually here. And so people are taking actions thinking that they're here when they're actually here, and they're wondering why they're not getting to here. That's what's happening. And so you can let's just take these roads, for example, that I just put down. If you think you're at the red spot, you think you're at the yellow spot, but you're really at the red spot, and you say this is headed this direction. Imagine if you executed on that plan, you would then end up here. It's just like, that's what people are doing. And so that's why we got to look at truth. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Yeah, speed is important, and honesty. Yeah, it's all fundamental basics and principles. Yeah, communication, influence, and speed. Gotta do it. Anyway, thank you so much for being here, and you're welcome. And stay tuned for cool things coming next. All right. Cheers, guys. All right. Bye.